Hello, my name is Mark Taylor, and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place for creative and inspiring learning from around the world. Listen to teachers, parents and mentors share how they are supporting children to live their best authentic life and are proving to be a guiding light to us all. Hi Phyllis, thank you so much for joining us here on the Education on Fire podcast. I know one of the most important things that we can do is to have the right environment for children to learn, for children to thrive. And I think there's so much about what we're going to talk about related to your book that's going to just give them that opportunity to kind of be in the best place they possibly can to live their best life, which is what we're really here all about. So yeah, thanks so much for being here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to talk with you.
So let's start. Where did America in Therapy come from a name, first of all, and what was that sort of driving force to create it?
Yeah, well, my background is that I have been a psychotherapist for over 30 years. And so I did a lot of work with families and individuals and children and couples, and, had such an up close and personal view of family dynamics. What are healthy dynamics? What are abusive dynamics, dysfunctional dynamics, or just, not dynamics that are not designed to help people thrive. And of course, as a psychotherapist, you see everything from the worst to the best. And looking through that lens of how a family influences each individual in the family and vice versa, I just took that lens and started to look at our country as the family of America, and what's the environment in the family of America, and what are the dynamics coming down from the most powerful people, the most powerful institutions, from government, and do they reflect healthy family dynamics? And if they don't, which many of them don't, how is that impacting a general populace or segments of the population, just the way dysfunctional parents might really be influencing and impacting spouses and children in harmful ways? And the reason why I wrote that is to shed light on that. It's educational. Like, how does psychology really help us understand what's going on, really not only in America, but in the world today? And what do we know from the best healing principles of psychology and psychotherapy that could be applied to much larger groups, including a nation, which I see a desperate need for? So it's the microcosm and the macrocosm and their intersection.
And I love that, because the thing that really fascinates me in terms of the conversations that we're having here at Education on Fire is the fact that many of us think if we had a silver bullet, we'd love to change the way the whole setup was, the ability to learn in a different way, the environment being a different way, schools in a different way, the interaction with the general population in a different way. But I think we're all in the same position where we think that's probably not going to happen tomorrow, and probably not even going to happen in the lifetime of the children that are actually in school at the moment. So therefore, we get to the point where that's why these conversations are so important, I think, because what can we do given those system problems, or the fact that the system may not change, and how we can do that? And so I think it sounds like what you're creating is exactly the same thing from that lens that you spoke about.
Right. And I think it's urgent because I think that our timeline is small in terms of how we're affecting each other. And if we don't change courses with some of the major dysfunctions that are operating both in families and in communities and on national and international levels, we're really at risk for more conflict, more war, and the threat of using weapons that we wouldn't survive. Just like in a family, if there's major dysfunction or abuse, you have the very great potential, which we see happen. It's not just a potential, but the actuality of people exploding on one another and on themselves, whether it's suicidal or homicidal, or there's some great physical violence or sexual violence or exploitation. And so what happens for the individual and the individual family is happening on these larger levels. And we know so much in the field of psychology about what can help interrupt these cycles of violence or inhumanity or dysfunction or whatever, addiction, whatever you want to call it, that could be applied. And there's psychological reasons why we don't apply what we know. And so I try to look at all of that, but only really ultimately through the ends of what could help us heal, not really who to blame or who to hate or who to act out on or who to, become aggressive toward at all, because none of that resolves anything on a psychological relationship level. But how can we heal, and what do we need to do? And just like for a family that's dysfunctional or a person that's dysfunctional, it may require major work. But it's possible because we see it possible. We see it happening in our offices. We see people really transforming their lives. And a country is no more than a mass of individuals. So if individuals can do it, larger groups can do it as well. If we put our mind to it, if we're educated about psychology, it's possible. So for me, there's hope of bringing ourselves back from some of the dangerous precipices we stand on if we educate ourselves and if we implement the best of what we know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious then, in terms of who it is the book is for,
Yeah.
is it people that are already looking to make these changes, maybe to improve their scenario or their situation? And I guess it's probably even more important for the people that maybe aren't coming across it or looking it for, because maybe they're the ones that need it the most. So sort of talk us through sort of how that worked from when you were writing it, and what you think could be beneficial for them.
Well, I wrote it for the layman. I didn't write it as an academic book or as a psychology book, but really as I'm addressing the general populace. I mean, I really think it could be for young people. I think it's for baby boomers like myself who already have some experience under their belt with the world as it is. I think it's for people who are raising children. I hope that it will extend its reach to people in governing positions, people in positions of power, so that and like you said, probably the first wave of people that it's going to speak to are people that are already on this wavelength of wanting to see us become more humane, more loving, more inclusive, more tolerant, more peaceful, and more committed to healing the family of man, rather than supporting certain groups in their quest for power or influence and control. So, yeah, the first wave of people is probably going to be more like minded people, but I'm really hoping to reach young people and have some of this knowledge and understanding. And it's not just my own. I mean, therapists everywhere are familiar with what I'm talking about, and people in other healing professions as well. But I'd love to see it become just part of our national conversation, our psychology, our mental health. Because right now in America, and I know this is true in many places all over the world, we're being fed that these great divides, the divisiveness, the threats of violence, the escalating hatred and discrimination, are ideological issues. And they're not. At their heart, they're mental health issues. Because when people heal their mental health, they heal their wounds, they heal some of the destructive things that have happened to them from other people, they become more peaceful, they become more loving, they become more cooperative, they become more inclusive, more compassionate. And I've never seen that not be true, ever. And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people over the years.
It really does sort of follow on from what you said. And I guess in that sort of linear way, in terms of the ages, you kind of hope that children and, like say, the country, the world has an environment which is incredibly supportive and loving and thriving. But what I really liked about what you said about sort of young people being able to get involved in this and to have these conversations, and to sort of understand the book, is the fact that they get very inquisitive. And you kind of,
Right,
as soon as those conversations start and you realize that your environment that you know now isn't necessarily the only one that's possible, it's also not necessarily the one that you need to recreate. Like you say, when you're sort of trying to get over the healing wounds and maybe experiences that you've been, you don't need to replicate that. You don't need to be the person that keeps that ball
right.
rolling into the next generation. So to really target those people so that they can think about it and understand, it's going to make a real difference to everybody in the here and now. And that must be, like I say, healing, but also a very worthwhile and exciting prospect for mass change quite quickly.
Absolutely. And, one of the things when I grew up, nobody talked about psychology. I didn't really hear about psychology until I got a little older, and I didn't contemplate going to see a therapist until I was in my 30s. And had I understood anything about family dynamics or symptomology from dysfunctional family dynamics, it might have changed my life early on. And that's my hope for young people today, really, that we could have psychology be just as much of a part of the curriculum as math and science and reading and geography and history and all of those other really good things that we need to learn. But I think our psychology is critical. What how do human relations operate? What are healthy human relations? What happens when people are hurt? There are so many people in the world today that have been so hurt in their own families, in their communities, nationally and internationally, economically, racially, religiously, in so many ways, gender wise, people have been so targeted and hurt and discriminated against or withheld from. And they don't even know because they've never had exposure why they're so symptomatic or that their symptoms are really an understandable result from the traumas that they've sustained. I had no understanding of that. I didn't know anybody who had understanding of that when I grew up. And it was really like a light bulb turned on for me. And I began to understand myself in a whole new way once the world of psychology opened up for me. And that's why I became a psychotherapist.
And do you think just the idea of being a psychotherapist, the idea of therapy, puts a barrier in place just in terms of the words and the way that it comes across in people's minds who aren't aware of what that is? Because the way that you were talking about it just before you mentioned those words was very human. It was very connecting. Like I say, it was I think people can sort of feel that they understand those things. So is it just a question of having more conversations so people understand it more, do you think, to get that sort of message across? Or is it just a question of maybe being a little bit more layman all the time, which of course is what you're trying to do through the book?
Right. Well, I think it's a lot of things, and definitely the things that you mentioned. I think very directly, it's important for people in my field and anyone who's experienced therapy in a way, or any other healing modality for that matter, that has really changed their life, to speak about it as, as something that actually takes strength and courage and is so well worthwhile what you get out of it in the end, because there's still a lot of stigma, I think, around the world of psychology and psychotherapy for some people, that it's a sign of weakness, or you shouldn't need, to talk to anybody. You should be able to figure it out yourself, or, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or whatever it is that and I think in America, and I don't know what it's like in the UK, but I know in America, and it's probably true in some Western countries at least, but and again, I really don't know, that we have such a profound importance that we've placed on the idea of independence. And it's really a myth. We're not independent. We need each other. And there's nothing wrong with needing each other. In fact, it's a sign of strength to acknowledge our interdependence with one another, whether it's emotionally, for a sense of belonging, for people to cooperate with, to have people that we care for and are cared for by. We all really need that. And the ways that people are most injured are when they don't get that. Um, and so I think we really need to shift the whole lens on what psychology is about to make it more mainstream acceptable, and not think that mental illness is just for the people at the very tip of the iceberg who have become so disturbed that they're murderers, or, robbers, or sexual abusers, or whatever. Mental illness really cuts across the board. We can all become more mentally healthy.
And it always seems to me that I guess it makes more sense now because people, like I say, are starting to talk about it more. But that sense of we've always talked about the fact, oh, I've got a niggle, my leg hurts a bit, or I hurt this doing that, and I'm healing, I'm looking after myself. I realise that maybe what I'm doing in this particular field isn't supporting me. It does seem amazing it's taken us such a long time to get to this point to talk about it from a mental health point of view, because the essence of who we are and the way that we think about the world and the way that we are within ourselves is probably even more important, some might argue, than the actual physical.
Well, I totally agree with you, and I actually talk about that in my book, that and because it's what you said is something that really strikes me deeply. If somebody, has a rare disease, we try to research it so we can cure them. If our computer breaks down, we'll run to the computer expert and get it fixed because we want it functional. We want it functional tomorrow, you know, um, and yet with our mental health, we don't. If a car engine blows, we'll design a new car engine right away as fast as we can. If a person blows, we don't do that. We tend to blame them. We tend to want to just lock them up and throw away the key rather than really, as a society, research what happened to that person. Why did they blow? Maybe they're not safe to be out in society yet or ever, depending on how much we know how to heal people. um, but I think there are many people that are um, able to be healed if they were looked at with compassion, if they were looked at with, how did you get here? You were born an innocent baby. Something happened to you that caused you to become raging or addicted, or highly anxious and obsessed, or whatever you became. Um, Something happened. And could we, and that's one of my urgent pleas really, is could we research that with our resources, with our time, with our money, and really get to the bottom of what is causing so much mental unwellness and so much acting out and acting in, so much depression, so much gun violence. I mean, the list is so long. Could we devote all of our time and resources to that? Because I say, and I think this is sort of what you're saying, people are the best resource we have. Healthy people are our best asset. Safe people are our best asset. If we have safe people, we don't need so many guns. If we redirect our resources and don't put them into so many weapons of mass destruction, we could have a healthy humanity that is actually sustainable for this planet. It's possible.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's that sense of it's very easy to think I want to help and fix you, which obviously as a therapist might be something that you're trained to do and something which you spend time doing. I think for the individual as well, sometimes it's hard to get across that message that actually all you need to do is to do the best that's for you. Look after yourself, heal yourself, be that guiding light, not because you want to be, look at me, this is what I've been doing, but just the fact that
Right.
anyone that comes across you when you're in that state, in that understanding and being your true self, people will be drawn to you, ask you about it maybe, or want to find out, be around you to find out what that is. And so you can just do the work on yourself, as it were, in inverted commas. And that's probably even more of a pulpit, if you like, than anything that you could sort of shout about if you were sort of had a big audience.
I totally agree with that. In fact, that's one of the things I shout about, which is, one of the best things anybody can do is do their own healing work. If you're suffering in any way, if you have, symptoms left over from childhood, or you've suffered childhood trauma or trauma in your community, or sexual trauma, or some kind of discrimination or economic inequality, or whatever it is, do your own healing work, change your own mindset. It's really possible to do that. And like I said, and you just said, each person, um, may be one grain of sand on the beach of the whole world population, but together, healing, we change that beach, we change that foundation.
So take us through how the book looks, how the book works, and sort of what you want to people to understand if you sort of guide them through that experience.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the big aha for me was what I mentioned in the beginning, that we could look at larger institutions and countries and organizations through the lens of family dynamics and family systems to see where ill health is operating and what's needed to heal. So the book starts with, just a little bit about my own healing journey and how it brought me to some of those conclusions and becoming a psychotherapist and the lens that I began to see America through. And then I talk at great length about what are the actual specific dynamics of a dysfunctional family, an abusive family. and so that it becomes common knowledge, because a lot of people grow up in families and they don't have exposure to what real mental health is, and so that most of us, if we don't have that exposure, we just accept as normal to some extent what we grow up with, and what many people grow up with is not normal, and it is dysfunctional. So I go into what those dynamics are of a dysfunctional or abusive family, and what some of the most common symptoms are that people have if they don't get a chance to heal or to be rescued from something that's highly dysfunctional or hurtful, and how those symptoms we're seeing proliferate in society today. Like, one of the two big ones that I talk about, and there's a whole list of symptoms. I mean, there's addiction, and there's depression, and there's anxiety, and there's being workaholics and people pleasers, and there are people who really act out on themselves or other people. But one of the things that I talk about that I think is so important looking at America and probably around the world today is that when there's a lot of untreated abuse, especially intergenerationally, and it just gets passed down, this dysfunction and neglect, you see sort of two big trends. Certainly, not everybody fits in any trend because we are individuals, but the two big trends that I see are either identification with the aggressor, which is learning to be abusive and dysfunctional and dominating yourself, and that is a natural outcome of being hurt by other people. It's dysfunctional, but it is to be expected because it's one of the things that people do to survive, is to become aggressive themselves. The other is to become passive and submissive. Many people who have been overpowered in their own homes or in their immediate communities, or even by their government, become very passive and submissive because there was no way for them to protect themselves. Nothing that they did worked. And I've heard clients say this outright to me who have been abused as children, that they froze. They just became completely still and passive because what they learned was if they tried to resist, the abuse was worse. And when people grow up with these kinds of symptoms and they become adults and they go out into the world, then you have more and more people who have either become somewhat submissive and easily influenced and controlled, and a whole other group of people who want to control them and who are dominating. And I see that a lot in America today. And I think it's because our families are so hurting, and because some of our institutions of power are so discriminatory and so hurtful towards certain populations here in America. Um, so that's, that's where I start. That's sort of half of the book, is really trying to educate people about abuse and neglect. And again, not to hate anyone, because one of the other big things that I really talk about is that our worst symptoms, whether someone's become totally passive and submissive and easily influenced and dominated, and they can't protect themselves or their children, which often happens for people who are untreated and have not found safety, or they've become aggressive and become the abuser in some way themselves. They're both victims. And we have to know that their symptomology is coming from disrupted, dysfunctional relations that they were subject to and dependent on and had to adapt to. So we have to know that inside the perpetrator somewhere is a victim. And if we don't get that as a society, and we don't figure out how to treat that on a much broader level, we can't stop the cycle of abuse because we keep producing abusers. So that's a big one. And what I say about all the symptoms, whether it's people pleasing or addiction or becoming abusive or becoming very passive, or becoming highly anxious and obsessed, or whatever you want to say are the symptoms of dysfunction in families. Um, in the world of psychology, we call those symptoms a call for help. When a child is brought to therapy because they're wetting the bed, or they're being really aggressive toward their siblings, or they're failing in school, or they're taking drugs when they're 10, or whatever they're doing, We call their symptoms a call for help because and I worked with a lot of children early on in my career. Um, and most of the children that I saw who were symptomatic in any of those ways were suffering from dysfunction in their family. There was really nothing wrong with them. Their parents were fighting, or there was a conflictual divorce, or there was some illness that was never being addressed with the kids. But most of it was conflict between the parents and often very highly conflictual custody battles. And the children were just torn apart by the unresolved conflict going on around them. And their symptoms brought the family to therapy. The parents didn't come. They brought the child because the child was wetting the bed or beating up their siblings. And then come to find out, oh, you're fighting in front of your child and they can't handle the anxiety and it's coming out somewhere. So if we just take that lens and we apply it to larger institutions and countries and organizations, and we have so much infighting here in America today. I mean, it's all over the news every day how people in positions of power are just slandering each other and spreading falsehoods and threatening. And, you probably read about all of it in the news. Um, the family of America is suffering. We're all suffering from these larger conflicts that we can't, that the average person cannot do anything about or control except take care of themselves. And I think we need to know that. So the whole second part of my book is about what is needed for healing. What do we need to do to heal? What are some of the big paradigm shifts that we need to make in order to heal the relations of large groups of people? And I talk about moving from a power over to a power shared dynamic. I talk about what it would be to embrace our equality as all worthy human beings with a right to exist here on earth. I talk about redefining, and I said a little bit about this earlier, looking at our fear of dependency and actually embracing our dependency and our interdependency as a sign of health and well-being. And so I talk about some of these major paradigms and then shifts that I think really probably need to happen. Or I should say, probably, I believe they need to happen for us to actually survive here as a human race because we're pushing ourselves toward more and more war around the globe. And it's just a highly dangerous model. And I believe the model of war and all aggression like that is obsolete. And I think we know it. I think we know that our weapons of mass destruction could destroy life as we know it. And for some reason, we're not willing to actually embrace that in policy and practice. Just like an abuser in a family may know, and they may not, but they may know that they're hurting other people or that this is a dysfunctional way of being or it's coming out of their own rage and pain, but they don't stop and they don't know how to stop or they don't want to stop because they want to stay in control. And certainly many abusive people do that because they just they want what they want. um, so the whole second part of my book is really devoted to what are some of the healing principles and healing practices that we could all embody in our own lives. And that's really the gist of it. It's for you and me to feel like there is actually something we could do to bring hope to this world. And there
And
is.
yeah, yeah, and it seems to me that sort of understanding that journey of kind of I didn't realize I had an issue or a problem or that my surroundings were having an impact. And if they are,
Right.
maybe this is showing me, now I understand a little bit more about me and I can have more sort of compassion for myself and the people around me. So everything you said makes so much sense from that point of view. What's kind of the next step? Sort of what are the tools that can help people? Obviously going to buy the book, maybe go
Right.
into therapy if they can. But are there sort of certain things that you say that sort of highlight that next step for those people who do feel trapped or are unaware of what to do?
Yeah. Well, one of them, there's two things I would say here. One of them is if you're suffering in any way, if you know you have childhood trauma or trauma from your present surroundings or relationships, or if you're just suffering, from addiction or you're depressed or you're highly anxious or you feel obsessed or you're just not For me, I know at one point in my life, I just felt like there was so much more inside me than was able to come out. And I felt so stuck around expressing who I somehow knew inside was my true self. So there were many things that brought me to therapy myself. And I would just say, find help wherever you can. And I know that's not available for everybody, but if it's available anywhere, a helpline, a therapist, a compassionate friend, um, seek that out. If none of that is available, one of the things that I always recommend to people is follow your own creative urges. There's something very healing about expressing yourself in writing or art or music or dance, or being out in nature and allowing yourself to be healed by Mother Earth, or loving a pet and being loved by a pet. Find a healing energy somewhere if you don't have it with another human being. But I do think that so many of us have been hurt by other human beings that we really need healing with other safe human beings. So that's one thing that I would say. And then and I think it's really important, and not to be ashamed if you're in pain. I mean, so many of us in America, I think, really try to hide our pain because we still feel like it's shameful. We should have it together. We should be successful. We should be thriving, and we don't want anybody to know we're not. And I can tell you the level of pain that I've worked with in myself and in so many clients over the years is inordinate today. And many people really feel like they can't show that. And it actually is a sign of strength. I want to say that so loudly, to ask for help and receive it and allow yourself to open and be vulnerable with a safe, healing, helpful, other human being. But the other thing that I talk about in depth in my book, as part of the healing part of the book, is that what I have found is that one of the ways that we can all help exit from some of the conflicts that are tearing our lives apart, whether it's personally or in the workplace or in a school situation or in another environment that we're in our communities, is to really learn how to focus on our own part in the play. Because we live, and I think this is one of the paradigms that I would love to see really shift on a global level, is we still live in a who's right and who's wrong paradigm. And I'm right and you're wrong is always the paradigm that we live in, right?
Mhm.
Only the problem is that you think you're right and I'm wrong, and so we're just at each other to try to beat each other into some kind of submission or admission that they're wrong and we're right, and the other person or group feels exactly the same way. And that's a win-lose paradigm, and that's the paradigm that underlies all war, which is win-lose. I'm going to win and you're going to lose, and I'm going to conquer you and I'm going to dominate you for whatever reason I feel, whether it's in a relationship or worldwide. And so we're really looking at, we need a win-win paradigm. And for me, one of the foundations of a win-win paradigm is I just take responsibility for myself. I learn, and I outline this in detail in a chapter in my book. I learn to restrain my most reactive impulses that are dysfunctional. I learn not to shout at you. I learn not to roll my eyes when you're talking. I learn not to slam the door and walk out on you or threaten you. So I might be angry at you. I might feel hurt by you, but I learn to restrain myself from my worst impulses the way I want you to. Because I don't want you to shout at me, and I don't want you to call me names, and I don't want you to slam the door and walk out on me. So I have to start with myself. That's the beginning. And then the next part is really reflecting on, where am I coming from? Am I listening to you? Am I so convinced that I'm right that I don't have any openness to hear another point of view? Or am I channeling my mother's, the way she was aggravated at my father? And could I speak in a different tone of voice to you, even if I don't agree with you? Could I soften my body posture? Could I ask you more open ended questions? So I'm reflecting on my own behavior rather than keeping on blaming you, pointing a finger at you, and focusing on you. And then, along with self reflection, and these things kind of merge together, but I take them apart to really illustrate them, is then I need to take responsibility for myself. If my voice is angry and blaming and shaming and loud, I need to take responsibility for the way I talk to you. Because really, the bottom line of healthy human relations is I treat you the way I want to be treated. That's the bottom line. And we're not seeing that on a national level at all. And it's terrifying to me in some ways. So so I learned to take responsibility for my behavior rather than keeping on pointing my finger at you and blaming you. And that might mean that I have to make amends. Maybe I see on self-reflection that I actually am overreacting or I'm in the wrong. Or maybe really feel like I have to take a very strong stand with you. But can I take that from a place of still having respect for you as another human being and being accountable for the way I express myself? So I could say, I don't want to continue this conversation if you're screaming at me, but I will talk with you if you lower your voice, as opposed to you're a complete jerk because you're screaming at me and I'm never going to talk to you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's me taking responsibility for my part in the play. The goal the goal is then that I move from taking that kind of accountability for myself, whether it's an apology or a stand. We have this expression in America, I don't know if you've heard it, but speaking truth to power with love, keeping the love as the container around it. And what that means is my goal in having whatever the conversation is with you is that we reconnect, that we come to some agreement, that we resolve our differences as much as humanly possible, or we agree to disagree and separate peacefully without violence. But the goal is really, if at all possible, that we reconnect to our care for one another. And what's happening in partisan politics in America today, which is a tremendous role model for everyone who lives here and probably people watching us around the world, is that we don't have that commitment to work it out. We don't have that commitment to listen to each other deeply and with respect and with the goal of resolving our differences and coming to some functional agreements that we can all live with, just like we want parents to do in families so their children aren't torn apart. And I can tell you from my experience as a therapist that it wasn't until these last two elections that I ever had clients come to therapy telling me they were traumatized by what's going on nationally in our country. No one ever talked about politics before 2016 in my office. And people were awake at night fearing that we're going to become, a totalitarian country. Um, and really traumatized by the fighting and by the maligning and by the outright threats that were going on and still going on. And that's why I brought the lens of psychology to this whole political social conversation, because the whole thrust of good psychology is to heal our relation with ourselves and with other people, and to become more peaceful, loving, cooperative human beings. So that's kind of the arc of the book.
Yeah, I love it, and I think what I thought was so important about this conversation is the fact that what we're able to do is we're able to kind of, whether you're a parent, whether you're in a peer group situation, whether you're a teacher, whether it's with your colleagues, you can probably hear and identify with all of those things, and you can put yourself in that particular situation in so many different ways. And I think the way that you've described it and the way that you've spoken about it, I think will give everybody that kind of, I recognize that, or I can see this, or I feel this, or I'm able to do something that might make a difference. Or, like you say, or you've actually realized that actually you are in quite a difficult place and actually you need extra support or help, whatever that may look like. And I think that's why these conversations are so important. That's why I love the podcast so much, and why it's so important for people to be really kind of, like I say, emotionally aware. And I think
Right,
awareness is the first point. From there, you can take action if you need
right.
to, or you can do
Exactly.
something. But without that awareness, you're absolutely just unaware and unable to do anything because you don't know what there is anything to do, if that makes sense. So whatever that
No, it
sentence
totally
is,
does.
yeah.
Well, I think what happens if we don't have any awareness, and that's why I see my book as partly just educational, as well as hopefully inspiring and insightful and a call to action, is for most of us, if we don't have any awareness, we just repeat what we know. And for so many people, what we know is dysfunctional. So
Yeah, it really does make sense. And I'm curious from that sort of educational point of view, is there an experience you had at school or a teacher that you had at school that you remember? And does that sort of tie into some of these experiences that you've then sort of heard in your office and then obviously sort of brought through into your book?
It's interesting. I grew up in a very intellectual family, so education was highly valued in my family, which I'm grateful for, because I actually enjoyed being a student. I loved school, I loved learning, I loved reading, and I loved writing. I always loved writing. My earliest memory of loving writing was in junior high school. And I had a teacher, an English teacher in high school, who really was a great influence on me because I don't even remember what she said or did, but somehow she saw that I had a talent for writing and she encouraged that. And she was a friend of my parents, and I think she even said that to my parents. So she was a great influence in my life because, we all need people who highlight our gifts and strengths, and everybody has one. Everybody has something worthwhile for contributing to the rest of us. And I was very fortunate to have that. And then I had other people later on in my life who also reflected back that I was a good writer, and it was definitely an encouragement. And then through writing on my own, I always did a lot of writing on my own. I started writing poetry, and then I wrote little pieces, and then I kept a journal, and then I ended up writing books. That process actually fed me, the process of writing. So I can't stress enough that, and this is one of the ways that we can become safe people for each other, is to reflect back each other's strengths and stop pointing out each other's flaws so much, but really see each other's essence and our strengths and encourage each other to be our best selves. Because I really believe everybody has something wonderful to contribute. It can be within their own home or the way they are with a pet. It can be that they're going to solve world hunger. It doesn't matter on what scale.
Yeah, I can see that. And I mean that is great advice, but is there any advice that you were specifically given that you'd like to share, or maybe some advice that you would sort of give your younger self now, sort of looking back with the
Mm.
experience that you have?
There was a piece of advice that I got that was actually life changing for me. I had a friend when I was in college who went to India to seek out a guru. And at that time, he had contact lenses and they were made of glass. And he was on this very dusty train in India. He told me this story when he got back. And by the time he got to the guru, his eyes were so inflamed by this dust getting underneath his contact lenses that he was in excruciating pain. And so the story he told me was that he related this to the master that he had sought out, and the advice he got was, don't resist. Don't resist pain. Embrace it. Lean into it. Well, that's counterintuitive for most of us. It certainly was for me. Like, you just want to get away from pain as quickly as possible. You want to numb it out as quickly as possible, or distract, or get a solution, or whatever. And that's also, normal that we don't want to be in pain. But with emotional pain, sometimes there is no quick fix. Sometimes, so what I really learned, and I applied this many times in my life, sort of even not knowing exactly what I was doing, was when I was in emotional pain, I really tried to lean in. I really tried not to run away. I really tried to embrace it. And then what helped me, and which I didn't learn from him, but which I added to that prescription, was, what is there for me to get out of this? What can I learn? What can I transform from this pain? What's the purpose in my life that it could serve for the good? Because just being in pain by itself is not a solution. For many people, it's just torture. But if there's something that I can transform from it, And we have an expression too that I don't know if you've heard in the UK, but it's transforming pain to purpose. And I feel like that's what I did in my life. And I feel like that's what most people that I know who are recovering from something are doing, and it's a natural outgrowth of healing.
Yeah, and I think understanding that and hearing that is an incredibly important point, isn't it? Like I say, rather than running away, just
Right.
understanding that there's a message here, or there's a growth opportunity here, or whatever that happens to be. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. And the acronym FIRE is really important to us here at Education on Fire. And obviously by that we mean
Mm,
feedback,
I love it.
inspiration, resilience, and empowerment. What is it that strikes you when you hear that?
Well, I love the word fire too, because I feel like fire, is a transformative energy. It transforms what it comes in contact with, and it releases energy that we can use for better or for worse. So we're learning how to use it for better. So I see fire as, feedback. I'll just say, like, we need to hear each other. We need feedback. And so often I think we think we're supposed to be islands, and we're not. So, inspiration, yeah, from the outside and from the inside. What's my inspiration from within? Where am I? I hope I'm answering your question. I don't know whether I
Yeah, yeah,
am or not,
absolutely. Yeah,
but
yeah. No right or wrong, just
yeah.
whatever comes to
Okay.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think of, like, the inspiration from within to heal, or the inspiration from within to be of service, or the inspiration from within to, connect. Um, and I read so many books when I was young about other people's healing journeys, and I think I was really drawn to that, partly unconsciously, because I didn't even know when I was young exactly what I needed to heal from. But those stories of other people's journeys were so inspiring to me, and they gave me hope. And I think we need each other for hope and inspiration, as well as whatever we, can contact and uncover within ourselves. Resilient for sure. Just get up and do it again, no matter how many times you're down. And I think that's where inspiration comes from, especially from other people who have gotten up out of, the most horrific circumstances and reclaimed their lives, and, really manifested something powerful through their recovery process. Resilience, I think, is just, we need that, and we need to role model that for each other. um, and I'm just saying, all the role models that I had were so helpful to me. um, and I think the more healing work each person does, the more resilient we become. So it's partly being inspired, and it's partly doing the work, because healing work builds resilience. We're just less taken out by what happens.
Yeah.
um, and then empowerment, I guess, for me, that's sort of, um, maybe the tip of that beautiful iceberg. There is that we learn how to, and we feel inspired to manifest our greatest selves in the world, and keep learning as we go. I feel like, I don't feel like I've arrived. I feel like I'm on a healing journey that I'll be on till the day I leave this earth. um, but am I more empowered than I was, when I was 20? Like a million times more empowered. And I think that's what healing brings, is that we find our true power. And our true power in the world is not power over, it's power with other people. It's something we share. We share the fruits of that healing journey with other people, and we want them, and this is a big one, that we actually really want other people to find their power too,
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, no, I really love that. I think it's so incredibly important, and you put it so eloquently there. I think it's a great way for us to finish up. So do make sure that everyone knows about the book. That's going to be the biggest resource that we can share today. Where can people find it? Where should they
Yeah,
go and find out
please.
more about you?
It's called America in Therapy: a new hope, a new approach to hope and healing for a nation in crisis. And I wrote it to America, but it really, I think it speaks to people all over the world. And I've been talking to people all over the world who resonate with what I'm talking about from a psychological point of view. So it's called America in Therapy. It's available from all major booksellers. You can go to my website and order it there. My website is www.phyllisleavitt.com. And I have lots of resources on my website. I have a free PDF available. If you contact me, you can get a free PDF that outlines those elements of repair that I went through about restraint, self-reflection, responsibility, all of that. That's there for you to make use of now. Um, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the social media, and I have lots of interviews on YouTube. So, but please buy my book and support this and get the details, because I think the details are where it's at. Like, we really need to know what's happening and what we can do.
Fantastic. Phyllis, thank you so much indeed. I really appreciate you sharing your story and your passion, which is what we love here on Education on Fire. And yes, keep up the great work, and I look forward to chatting again soon.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. Really appreciate it. And you've been a wonderful host.
I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and thank you so much for being part of the Education on Fire community. Links and details of today's podcast are in the description, and if you would like to support the show with a small donation, that's a wonderful way to help me bring you more creative and inspiring learning. Please visit educationonfire.com/support, and remember, education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.